Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 174 of the podcast, and it's the first episode of 2020. So happy New Year. Hope you had a great break and you're ready to get at it now with a new year. And I'm excited about this episode that you're going to hear. We're kind of in the middle of the Volunteer Bootcamp series. So we had 3 episodes to end last year where we did some Q&A about volunteer recruiting and onboarding and encouraging volunteers. And then we're going to wrap that up now with 3 episodes. Today's about training volunteers with Dan Scott. And then we'll talk about empowering volunteers with John Burkmeyer next week. And then we'll end it all with Christine Kreischer talking about retaining volunteers. And so if you've missed any of those episodes, keep in mind that you want to watch the full Volunteer Bootcamp training. It was a live webinar we did last year at the end of summer, but it's available as kind of a free course at ministryboost.org. You can also find it in the show notes for this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 174. But you want to check that out, see those trainings, hear from those leaders. And then we're going to play a snippet here. So you're going to hear a little bit of what Dan talked about, but then we're going to jump into some of the questions that we weren't able to get to in the live event so that he can speak to those. Now, before we jump into the episode, I want to let you know about some training opportunities that are coming up with Ministry Boost that are free. We've got 3 webinars that are going to happen over the next 6 weeks, different topics. We're going to talk about how to keep kids safe online. So as a church leader, you certainly want to learn about that, but for parents as well, you want to hear about that. There's going to be some great content in that webinar. I'm really excited for that. We're also going to have another one on how to create sensational ministry environments. Think about, and we mean sensational in the different senses that you need to tap into to create kind of an irresistible environment. So this is helpful whether you lead children's ministry, student ministry, maybe it's your main services in your church, whatever that is. We want to create irresistible environment. So how can we do that? And there's some tools and tips and tactics that are out there that many of us aren't using that can play a big part. And I'm excited to share something new in that webinar that our church is using. And we've had a solution for this for years, and I'm sure many of you all have. You've probably had the same solution we have. It's not been a good one, but there's something I didn't even know existed. So we're excited to share with you about that. And then in February, we're going to have kind of another webinar to launch something new with Ministry Boost. So we're excited to share that with you. That's all coming up. So it's 3 different training opportunities, all free, all online. Just go to ministryboost.org, look for the webinars section on the homepage, or click the button up top that says webinars and sign up for some of those. But without further ado, let's jump back into this Volunteer Bootcamp conversation where I'll play a snippet from what Dan Scott had to share, and then we'll ask him some questions all about training volunteers.
You know, in all of these situations, we're always learning new information. You know, you guys are going out, staff members, you get to go to these different trainings. You get to go to Orange. You get to watch these videos for Ministry Boost. But how are we getting that information to the people who are actually in the trenches with kids, with families, week in and week out? We need to make sure that that's ongoing. And I love that Paula brought up huddles. Man, that's my monthly training. That is truly where we invested in our small group leaders, especially. That's where we would take 5 minutes to say, hey, guys, this month, this week, you have to try this, ask this question. Look at your curriculum. How are you preparing? How are you memorizing your script? Those are ongoing conversations that you can have in huddles. We also, one of the monthly trainings that we did, we had the people who led those huddles. So we had a small group coaching. So we had small group coaches that then were in charge of small group leaders. So those coaches, we would pull them together monthly. And we would say, hey, this is what's coming up in curriculum. This is what you can expect. These are some things that we'd love for you to cast vision for. These are the events that are coming up. How can we pray for you? What's happening with your team? And then they would go and then they would relay that information to their specific small group leaders. And that was, just a really important time throughout the year that we get those monthly trainings with those lead volunteers who would then be able to be equipped to lead their volunteers that they cared for, which was super important for everyone. Well, the last thing I would like to think about or talk about, which isn't specifically training, but it's related to training, and that is an ongoing evaluation process. Uh, I the hardest thing is if a volunteer does not fit in their role. You've given them all the training, you've set them up to win, and you watch them on a Sunday, and you're like, man, this is not the best fit for that volunteer. Having an ongoing evaluation conversation is really important, so there are no surprises in ministry. The worst thing that you could do is the only time you meet with volunteers is when something's wrong. You need to be able to, constantly be encouraging them, constantly be telling them, hey, I noticed this week. You just nailed that. That was a great conversation that you had with those kids. Man, you were great on stage this week. You just clearly told the Bible story. But here are some things that I would work on, and have this constant spirit of improvement. So what I would do for my storytellers, and especially people on stage, worship leaders, that sort of thing, is I would record them. And now, with the advent of everyone has a video camera in their back pocket, just set it up in the back of the room, film it, and send it to them. Have them watch themselves and self-evaluate, and then have a conversation afterwards, because most likely they're going to be harder on themselves than you are. But it gives you a starting point from where you can have a conversation about how you can get better. And this can be with, your coaches and your small group leaders. Have a budget for them to have one-on-one conversations about, hey, how's it going leading your kids? Are you noticing that you struggle with anything? Is there anything I can help you with? Is there anything I can, give you training for? Is there a book that I can get for you that would help you, learn this better and do better at this task that, we've given you? So, all said and done, the idea here is that training is not just this sporadic drop-in of information, but that you have looked strategically and said, hey, we're going into the Easter season. We're going to have some volunteers. We're going to need more volunteers. We're going to need you to understand how to talk to a kid about faith, maybe how to tell your personal story with Jesus. How do you do that? Man, that's a great time of year. March, April, start thinking about how do you help small group leaders, storytellers understand how they can tell a faith story. Like, that is a strategic training that needs to happen right before those specific times of the year when that's gonna come up. So it's creating a culture, man. It's creating this ongoing spirit of, we are constantly going to get better at what we do because it is that important in the life of our families and the life of our kids.
All right, Dan, well, thanks for sharing with us in Volunteer Boot Camp all about how to train leaders. And we had a number of questions that, we weren't able to get to in the live call. So I'm going to start with this one. Do you have any recommendations on how to train leaders to tell their faith story?
Yeah, for sure. There are like books on it, right? There's one by Dan Allender. There's a lot of resources out there that they could kind of go through and work through and talk through. But the truth is, they don't have time for that. They just need to know, what's my story? I've never written it down. I've never put it down on paper before. And so for our volunteers, if you were working with kids in any capacity, so whether it was a small group leader or a large group communicator, we gave all of them just like a basic 5-question worksheet that they were able to say, oh, okay, this was what my life was like before I encountered Jesus. This was the person or the people or the situation that exposed me to church, or what was the catalyst to me having a relationship with Christ? And then how has my life changed? What am I doing to grow? How am I living out that faith? Those sorts of questions that were, all put together. And that seemed to be helpful because no one ever had really written out their story, and basically it's like, hey, if you're giving people who are getting baptized a list of things, because you're going to shoot a video or you're going to have them give their testimony, it's basically that same thing where you could just have these people organize, their thoughts related to specifically their relationship with Christ. The other thing that we did, which is related to this, was how does the story today relate to my personal story? And that was something that we worked through anytime there was written into the curriculum, tell a personal story like this. We would give them like, okay, what does that mean? How does my story relate to this Bible story? Who do I relate to the most in this Bible story? How does my situation connect to that situation? Where in my life have I seen this made real? And, a lot of it is just giving them the right framework to think about it, because we experienced it, but very few of us have an opportunity to share it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. How about this question? Practical question about like when you get volunteers together for a training, do you recommend training student volunteers and adult volunteers together or separately?
I think it depends on the training. I think there's probably some general training that you want everyone to be a part of. You want them to feel that everyone is equally important in the room. If I'm doing my policies and procedures and I'm going through, what do we wear? Like what's the attendance policy? Like everyone, you can do that for everyone. I think when you have students who are small group leaders and they've never had to do discipline with kids before, or like what crowd control looks like, what does it look like to prepare a lesson? What are the expectations for that? You can probably separate them and then have, a specific time where you're investing into them. That's hard though. I mean, let's be honest, that means it's another meeting or another night, or how do I separate them? When do I separate them? I think if you're doing like a beginning of the year training where you want everyone on the same page, maybe a breakout after a general training is, hey, if you're a student leader, we want you to come and we're going to talk to you for 45 minutes and give them a different expectation, or just maybe not different, but just a more specific expectation, fill in some gaps for them that they may not have otherwise.
Yep. We've done mostly like they're included in all the training, but there are some special add-ons would probably be the way to think to the trainings that we've done. How about this?
We always told, just a follow-up to that, we always told we had a lot of junior hires serve in our preschool ministry. And we always told those leaders, the adult leaders that were in charge, like, you're almost a youth pastor to those kids. Like, you're helping mentor them and what it means to serve the body. Like, this is their first experience ever, serving in this capacity. So we almost created a mentoring type program within the volunteer system. So they had a little bit more, like they were checking in, they were giving them pointers and tips throughout the hour. So it was more like an on-the-job training as opposed to, hey, come on this added night or this breakout and let's give you something different. It was more like as things came up, they just knew, oh, let me just take you aside. Okay, when this happens, like, let's just work through it this way. And so it was more like on the job, but it was definitely specific training, knowing that they just don't have as much experience, as the adults in your room.
Yeah, my preschool director did that too with students one time. Where it's like, because a big part of her team, I think 25% of our kids' team are student volunteers, but it's higher percentage in preschool. It might be a third. And so she did one time just because it was like you're talking about. It's like, hey, we need to get the fundamentals, and that was good. And then something we did once that we have not done regularly, and I wish we did, is our student pastor organized just a breakfast for all student volunteers. And it was just a chance to celebrate them and, hey, you're doing awesome. This is great. And cast vision for why this matters. And it didn't matter where they served. It was for all, student volunteers. And it's something I could see us doing every year. We even talked about it. We just haven't followed up. Yeah. It's been 2 years, I think, since we did it. So how about this? I know this is a tension a lot of people wrestle with. If you're doing, they said for quarterly trainings, but however often you do them, Do you try to have one for each group, elementary, preschool, check-in team, guest services, whatever, or just as necessary? Do you do it all together? What do you think?
I think it depends on your group, like the specific group that you're talking about. For us, I was getting my small group coaches and my large group communicators together in the same room every month to just do like, hey, here's what's coming this next month. Here are the things to keep focused on. Does anyone have any volunteer needs? Anything that we need to talk through? Cast vision, because we expected that core leadership to then transfer a lot of that information to the small group leaders and the more in the trenches with kids, volunteers. But every other month or every third month at that meeting specifically, we would do some specific targeted like storyteller training, large group training. I would take all my large group volunteers. My small group person would take all the small group volunteers or small group coaches, and we would take them through something, where there was more skills training. For our host team, that was more of an ongoing conversation about customer service, about welcoming people. It was a harder group to bring together at the same time just because of the way that they served. They're on much more of a rotation base as opposed to everyone showing up every Sunday. But we definitely always recommended books to them. We would give them little snippets and weekly emails and that sort of thing. But for some of it, I think I don't think it's as necessary. I think it's scheduled times at the beginning of the year. Hey, this month we're doing this. We'd love for you to come up. This month we're doing this, because the more regular and scheduled it is, the more people see value in it and the more they can clear their own schedules and show up.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads to this next one, because the next question is probably one a lot of people have asked. How can we boost participation? I mean, I've asked this question sometimes, like in a room of ministry leaders, and what percent of people show up to your volunteer trainings? It's pretty common to hear 30%, 40%, something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do you think you can boost that participation number?
I mean,
pay him.
Yeah, I know, right? I think that's the thing. It's a volunteer role, but I think there are things that we can do. We always offered food. If you really care about it, I would consider paying for childcare. I know a bunch of churches that have started to do that. Hey, we value this. We value your time. We also know that costs you if you're a young family. And so we'll reimburse your childcare. And there's like a rate that you create. And it's not like it would cover all of it, but it would definitely, cover some of it just to kind of ease the excuses. You have to try different days and nights and, figuring out when are people there. What's interesting, I spoke at a church this past weekend, or I guess 2 weekends ago, and it was a volunteer training. I did a volunteer training event, and then the next day I did a parent event. So it was a Saturday, Sunday deal. And they had it on Saturday morning at 9:15, massive breakfast. And then they paid for each group to go out to lunch afterwards and debrief what they learned about during the training. So like they said, okay, look, I know we're asking you for, 6 hours of your time on a busy Saturday, but we're going to make it worth your while. We're going to pay for this. We're going to pay for that. We're going to offer childcare for this. And we're going to, make this happen. That room was packed. Now, I don't know, like you said, percentage.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what the percentage was of volunteers to people who showed up, but there were literally 300 volunteers in the room. Like it was a great event.
Yeah.
The next day for the parent event, they actually did the parent event during the second service. So they were like, we value this. We want drop your kids off, free childcare, across the board. And instead of going to service, come to this parent thing because we believe in partnering with parents. And I was like, those two ideas, I wish I had thought of that, hijacking service for the sake of that. Because you're like, when am I already here? When is the person already coming? If we really value this, our calendar will reflect that. And so that's you as a church getting on the same page with everyone and, making sure that happens. But, those are things, to think. So I think I think I talked about this in the session too, but like creating that culture of volunteer training, that this is just something that we do, and a culture of valuing the opinions of our volunteers, that when they can see that their ideas matter and they see some of their ideas get implemented in some way or another, they're more likely to come and participate and take ownership. If they just think they're a cog in a system and they're just showing up to do this job that you need them to do, then they're less likely to feel like they want to come, as opposed to saying, no, when you show up, we take your ideas and we're going to work them through a system and we're going to try to implement them because they're working, with the kids week in and week out. They're going to have a lot of ideas that are going to be important that we need to listen to and implement.
Yeah. So one person asked, what's a good training plan for a year look like? And I thought that'd be interesting for you, one, because you did this, so you had training plans you had for your ministry, but also because Orange provides like weekly content and monthly different training packages. So knowing what, you can get from Orange and even what you did as in your own ministry, what would you say a good training plan could be in a year?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was on staff at the church, our year revolved around the school year. I think a lot of churches have moved to that model where you look at the year from August to July or September to August, depending on where you are in the country. Yeah. For us, it was like, okay, what's ministry launch look like? And so that's like your kickoff. That's big. It was massive. For us, that was policies, procedures, vision casting, and like, what do you need to start doing your job right away? And so it wasn't necessarily like skills training, but it was more like, hey, if you've never used a curriculum before, you can come to this breakout, and this is, curriculum 101. This is this is what we expect of you. This is what you can look for. This is what you can find. So more orientation related stuff. But I would meet with the storytellers and the hosts. Someone would meet with all the small group leaders, give them tips on how to connect with leaders, what expectations, all of those. And that was massive. Then around November was when we did more of a skills training. You talked about that. We just talked about that specific training or that quarterly training. November, beginning of November, you probably have the majority of your volunteers in place. Let's be honest. In September, you don't. But hopefully by November, you filled in the rest of those gaps and you can pull those individual teams together and you can do something big. Again, because it's November, at least in the States, you're thinking about Thanksgiving, you're thinking about giving projects, you're thinking about all of these things. It's just a great time to say, hey, we're really thankful for you. Come out to dinner tonight. Come out to breakfast today on Saturday morning, and we're going to do some training and we're just going to celebrate. I think having a spirit of celebration at each of these things will also help with some of like, how can we boost participation? So they're not being told what they're doing wrong. They're just saying, hey, we just want to give you what you need to do your job better. And we're going to celebrate you for showing up. For January, usually got a new crop of volunteers. People that, filled in hopefully some of the growth that you saw throughout the fall. You're going to have more groups, hopefully. And so you do have some new volunteers coming on. So I think January is a great time to refresh everyone, reinforce vision, because you don't want vision drift happens, so maybe reinforce vision and then start looking forward to the Easter season. Like, hey guys, I know that you guys just got done through Christmas And that was awesome. Let's celebrate that. This is what we saw. These are the people we saw come through the doors, the stories that we heard. We're now looking towards Easter. We want to do a big job there. So, it's kind of looking them towards that. And then March, skill training, again, going into the Easter season, make sure everyone's on the same page. This would actually be a great time to pull your host team together and say, hey, what are we doing for people who are showing up for the first time, who do not know our building, who have no clue what's happening? How are we a welcoming place for them? How do we make it easy for them to register for today only, or, whatever we need? That's a good time. And then May and June, man, volunteer celebration, kick big, massive party to end the year. And like the MVP box back from Orange, offers several of those.
Yeah, I was going to say multiple.
Launch. It has the volunteer celebration. It has a sermon series that allows you to like cast vision to your entire church. Like, this is why we do what we do. And so, all that. And then there's like recruitment in there too.
Sure. Yeah. And onboarding those new volunteers.
Yeah, exactly.
How about, last question, and it's a little off topic, but some people are going to be able to relate to this. How do you connect with leaders after, you've been leading this team and there's just some people who aren't on the same page? Maybe they don't like your style. Maybe they don't like how you do the services or even the program itself or the content or whatever. There's just some kind of vision disconnect. And what do you do with folks like that where they're not coming to trainings, right? The relationship is a little tense.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer isn't training. It's deeper than that. At least that's what I'm reading into when I read this question. So what would you say to her?
Yeah, we had that. When we decided to go to a small group model, when I was on staff at the church, there were definitely some moments where you were having conversations with people where you were hoping to keep them as volunteers. And by the end, I was more willing to let them go. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes think, man, getting the right person is more important than getting a person. And so I have to be willing to let people go and say, I just have a feeling that this isn't a great connection here. We'd love for you to continue serving in children's ministry, maybe just not in this role, because the people that are in this role, they need to be bought into what we're doing here. And if you're not, we're always going to be frustrated with each other. You're going to be frustrated at us. We're going to be frustrated with you. I think the best would be to, find another area to work in. These are hard conversations, but if you've set clear expectations, this is the vision for our ministry, this is where we're headed, this is what we're doing. If you can't get on board with that, this just isn't a good fit anymore. A lot of it is having one-on-one conversations with those people. It's not calling them out in the middle of a meeting. It's not, it's that Matthew 18 stuff where it's like, you go to them and you're like, hey, I'm just noticing this. How can I help? If you care about kids, we both care about kids. So right now it's a paradigm situation. It's a programming situation. How can I help you understand the program? And if they is like, oh, maybe they just don't understand it, they get on board, they're great. But if they don't, I think we have to be okay for them to walk away and find another area of ministry in the church. And it could be that you as a church have decided, this is our mission. We're going to reach people who no one's reaching, right? And they're like, I can't be on board with that anymore. Okay, well, now it's a bigger conversation. Like, maybe our church isn't for you. Like, maybe you need to find a church that is more, in line with how you feel. Hard conversations, not saying it's easy at all. But I mean, when we made that transition, I literally was sitting across from staff members and having that conversation, where it's like, we're not doing this anymore. And and they decided to, move on to other areas of ministry. They decided to go off staff. I think when you cast vision, clear expectations, you're like, this is it. This is where we're headed. People, if they fight against it, you just can't have that in the church, right? You're building unity. That's the goal, is that we're all on the same page. We're all on the same train. We're all going on the same direction. We can't have these places where we're fighting with each other, and that for the sake of the church, you need to be able to let go of that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in this question, it said they don't come to training; they'll come to huddle. So it sounds like it's a rogue situation anyway. They're probably only there because they want to do what they want to do. So who knows what they're doing in their own group or whatever they're doing? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so it's probably good to separate and end that. So cool. Well, those were all the questions we weren't able to get to in the live, volunteer boot camp event. Thanks for doing that, for sharing, your session and training, for coming back and answering these questions. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, no problem.
There you have it. We loved having Dan as part of the Volunteer Boot Camp live event, and then again on the podcast here to hit some of those questions. Here are a few action items I think of coming out of that interview. One would be to create a 1-year training plan for this year, especially if you're listening to this episode when it comes out. It's the beginning of 2020. Maybe you've already done this, maybe you haven't, but it's certainly not too late to create a training plan for this year. The other action item is to think about how can you incorporate some type of online, on-demand training. We recommend Trained Up. It's a great online platform for providing training to your volunteers. You can get 10% off for life by using the code BOOST10. So just go to ministryboost.org/trained-up and then use that code BOOST10 if you sign up and start providing content to your volunteers online. I don't think that's a great exclusive solution, like the only way to do training, but it is a great supplement to your training plan. And then probably the most common thing that's been talked about in the volunteer boot camp sessions and even the Q&A has been huddles. And huddles are a great way to train just in small pieces. It'll take you maybe 2 months to train through huddles, what would maybe happen in a 2-hour training. But you'll get a lot better attendance at huddles. And, even if somebody only comes to 6 of the 8, that's still better than them missing, that 1 2-hour training that you're going to do. So start huddles. There's so many reasons you should start volunteer huddles. So if you don't have that already, do that. But if you do have them, maybe you'll start some type of small training, that'll build each week for the next month or 2 or 3 or something like that. And I think that'd be a great way to train your volunteers this year. So like I said in the beginning, we've got some great opportunities coming up with Ministry Boost, some different trainings, keeping kids safe online, creating sensational ministry environments, and then the February 12th webinar where we'll talk all about something new and exciting for Ministry Boost. You can sign up for those at ministryboost.org. And I hope this episode was helpful, and I hope you listen to the rest of them and lead and serve your volunteers better this year in 2020. And just have a great impact and ministry is interesting because what you put in is not always what you get out, right? We do not determine the output, but we do determine the input. And so I hope this episode and all these episodes are helpful in that. And you're going to love hearing from John Berkmeyer, Christine Kreischer in the next 2 episodes. And then we've got some great interviews coming up after that I've been excited to share with you because of this volunteer boot camp series. They've been kind of waiting. But there are going to be some great episodes. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking for this new year, and I hope you are too. If there's anything I can do to help you, if there's any suggestions you have for the podcast, guests, topics, I'd love to hear from you. Just email me at nick@nickblevins.com. But thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing, and I hope you have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.